Vinay Gariasi, can you hear us? Vinay, show of hand if you can hear us. Okay, good. We still can't hear you, Vinay. Your audio is not coming.
Sorry, can you hear me now? Rajaram? Rajaram, can you hear me now? Calling Rajaram 1 2 3 4 5 6 7 8 9 0. 1 2 3 4 5 6 7 8 9 0.
Vinay, I don't think we can still hear you. We will anyway get started.
Can you hear me now? Okay, I think we should get started. And you guys can set up.
Very happy to welcome T.M. Krishna and Mrs. Prema Rangachari. Good evening, ma'am. So, we have had a little bit of an opportunity to interact with on the topic of equity in education. So that's a very important topic, and something that Asha deeply cares about. So I'm very glad that two very eminent people who have very interesting opinions on this matter are here to talk to us on this topic. So just before we start that, I just want to make one small announcement. So we couldn't have an informal interaction with all the speakers to the extent that we wanted. So I hope after this talk for about 20 minutes, we can call Simantini and Purnima also to the stage and have a common interaction with all the panelists who are here. So I hope that's all right. Okay, wonderful. So I'll kind of let T.M. Krishna and Mrs. Prema Rangachari take it from there.
Good evening. I'm going to just continue the same way that I did in the afternoon. I'll be the devil's advocate and I'll let her do all the important speaking. I'm just being an advocate, so you can decide it's a defense or offense, I don't know. Equity in education is the theme that has been given, and I want to understand. Now, when we say equity in education, education can be understood in many ways. We obviously talk about institutional education, we talk about the school framework. But what are we referring to? Are we referring to equity in terms of syllabus, subjects that are taught, how it is taught? Are we also discussing about what a classroom will be? What is the environment? How will children, for example, if food is provided in school, is it going to be vegetarian food for everybody? Is avoiding non-vegetarian food an inequality by itself? What about culture? What about simple things as where people sit, or where people sit, where people do things, which are all preconceived and many times go missing in the larger spectrum of what happens in the classroom curriculum. So I want to probe this idea of equity, not just in terms of curriculum framing or in terms of access to education, but also what is the institutional responsibility in the larger framework of equity in a school setting.
Okay, it's a large question and needs a large answer. but I will make it a concise answer in the sense, so I'll take it in 2-3 levels. First, we all know that education today is a standardized curriculum in an attempt to give an equal opportunity to students from different backgrounds, different kinds of schools. You have government schools, you have matriculation schools, you have special schools, and you have alternative schools, everything with a different background, everything catering to a different kind of student population and parent population. When you have this kind of very wide diversity of students, parents, environments, culture, so equity can be possible in a school environment only when we extend this equity idea into the community from which they come. When we start about having equity in the classroom, how do we do it? When we think there'll be a reality only when we have a learning structure that addresses the needs of the different groups of people. So every group of people requires a different kind of curriculum. So are we going to provide different curriculums to different kinds of people or different kinds of environments or different kinds of communities? Are we going to do that? That may be a very complex situation. Yet in a school environment, we already know that children learn in different ways, like visual, auditory, kinesthetic. If you give the learners the opportunity to learn in these different ways, that itself brings in a level of comfort and equity in the classroom. So I think the first step of bringing equity in the classroom is to make the learner comfortable in the way that he's taught, in the way that he's able to absorb what is done in the classroom. Apart from that, the other point is when you, a second question that he talked about, how habits and relationships and differences in class, creed, religion, all these differences that come into the classroom, how are we going to address that? Because that is also a point of bringing in equity. So if we have a structure in which that we can sort of not give prominence to these ideas of caste and creed and religion-based ideas, then we have, in a way, not only made equal, but also a certain amount of equity in the classroom. Equity, once again, let me just tell you, equity is not becoming equal. Equity is different from equal. Because when I say equal, I give the same food to everybody. I give the same lessons to everybody. I give the same tests to everybody. I give the same treatment to everybody. Even that is equal, okay? But equity means that you start from where each child is and then take them forward. Give them that advantage that others have. Only then equity can come into play.
So I just want to touch upon two things you said. You brought in the word equality.
Yes.
And considering what has happened, for example, in India last few weeks ago, the whole idea of the hijab, and I think we can't run away from that conversation, Phil. Because the notion that uniformity is equality needs to be challenged very strongly here. Because everybody is dressed the same way or have a uniform in school, it doesn't equalize them. So why I'm bringing that example specifically is the question is what are we going to, when we say equity in school, it also includes things like clothes, right?
Absolutely.
Right?
Absolutely.
So we all know we can definitely enable a possibility where there is a diversity, or shall we say, I prefer saying non-exclusivity rather than inclusivity, because I think inclusivity coming from personal privilege is very condescending. So I would rather say non-exclusivity. The notion of non-exclusivity then needs to accommodate the possibility of diversity. So how does one negotiate that part? Because I think it's a very important question that we answer very easily by using exactly what you said, right? Everybody dresses the same way, so everybody is equal. So how does one, because I want to really look, because it's also about food. I know we're talking about curriculum, it's also about food. Most alternative schools do not serve non-vegetarian food. They do not.
Correct.
And isn't that fundamentally unequal and judgmental of culture?
In a way, you're right. It is a judgment of culture. But then there are other issues of having non-vegetarian food or vegetarian food. I think that is it's not a point of equity at all for me, because I think it's a more convenience of what can be provided. I think that is what it is. Because if they feel that non-vegetarian food is difficult to provide, or it may be difficult to cook, or I don't know what it is.
It isn't.
I think food than non-vegetarian.
Well, I'm not convinced by that argument, because I think this whole idea of what is easy and what is convenient is coming from a position of not experiencing life in a different manner, right? And I feel there really needs to be investigated with greater seriousness. Because when you say equity in the classroom and curriculum, it has to begin in every other aspect of school life, right? Another thing I'm just moving on so we can, not much time, but there's another thing you said, which also I noted down, which is the idea when you said, and this goes to what we wanted to discuss in the second question. You said you said when things like caste, religion, etc. are not given prominence.
Yes.
To me, that's slightly
not explicit.
No, but what do you mean? Because that's how that is how most people with caste privilege will say. We never discuss caste at home.
No.
I'm giving you an analogy, right? I mean, why would you and I in our house ever discuss caste? There's no necessity, because we've never faced what caste oppression is. It's like, why would a man ever talk about women's oppression? I mean, what does a man know about it? Exactly, it's the same analogy. So my point is, I think there is something tricky over here, and I just want to address the trickiness of it. Is it possible, and this is a challenging question I'm asking, okay, that a school finds a way to enable a conversation on these tricky ideas? I completely understand the sensitivities involved, and I'm aware of how it's not as easy as it is said in an intellectual conversation. But is it possible then for the school to be a place where this is part of a cultural happening? May not be explicit, like you said, right? But how does one enable that? Because in that is also a sense of equity. There is also a sense of creating conversation from childhood. For example, I'll take my example just to extrapolate what I'm saying. Till I grew up with privilege. I studied in a privileged school. All the people in my school were like me, right? But we discussed equality. Isn't there such an irony? Equity. I have not experienced any idea of inequality in my life or diversity in my life, but intellectually I'm engaging with this idea, right? So only after I get out of that, and so that's the funny thing about our education system in this country. Well, we have a completely casteist education framework in this entire country, and we want all of us to understand equality and discrimination. I think it's quite ironical that we expect ourselves to do. So my question is, how can we challenge that in, shall we say, creative ways in a school?
I have the fact that I said in the very beginning that each school had caters to a group of people. They are coming from the same strata of society or same kind of environments. So as you said, they will all, whatever they discuss will be only in the framework of what they have experienced, not from what the other person has experienced. Well, the other thing about not being explicit about caste is that I feel, especially in most schools, they will sing songs which talks about Jesus, it talks about Allah, it talks about Krishna, and then they feel they have done justice of it, which I think is a false notion. Because just because you have had symbols of all the religions or symbols of all the creeds and castes that exist in an environment, and then you have plastered it around school, doesn't mean that the individual has changed or accepted those ideas, or even not contradicted those ideas in a aggressive way in their own minds. It doesn't mean that. So fine, that is why I said there should be a sensitive way of making children aware that these are aware there. That's how life is. That's these the people around, and whether they are whatever be, they are the humankind. I think that is the emphasis that we can give to bring in equity.
So, how do you do it? You do it through events, you do it through conversations. do you do? I mean, how is it? I mean, how is it actually in action done?
In action. Okay, I have felt the model of a theme-based interdisciplinary model works very well in this, because we have children of different talents coming from different environments. They bring in their knowledge into the classroom. Suppose if I was going to talk to you about the theme of soil, say, if I take the theme as a soil, there are 101 ways that you can extrapolate that idea at every level of the classroom, whether it be the kindergarten or the 12th standard. You can extrapolate the same idea through every class with extra information, extra experiments, extra knowledge from their own base. For example, if I can play a little clip, first clip, can you play? This is about, just listen to that clip, and I give you an idea as to what we can learn from other children in the classroom. Kaki dage, kaki dage. Oh, okay, I continue, just play. This is a song by the Irula people, right? The community. They have a song which documents about 25 to 30 varieties of spinach. We know about 3 or 4 maximum, including those 4 or 5 spinach varieties. They have about 25 varieties and they're documented in song. And we can't consider those people as illiterate or are not knowledgeable. So the fact that they bring their knowledge onto the table gives a tremendous amount of equality and equity. Their voices heard. So in a sense of a theme, if you work, each one provides from their environment and their exposure into the classroom, and others learn from each other. So imagine if they have documented saying where the spinach is and around which village it is found, and where can you find, is it near a stream, or is it is it a parasite on a tree? These are the kind of information that is there in that song. The spinach has a following place where it is found. So they've documented all the villages around, all the different names of the spinach varieties, which they dance to. I mean, they are always dancing and singing for whatever they do. So they dance to that. So this kind, they have documented all the trees. In their love songs, they talk about only the trees around, the rivers around. So these are all information that they've collected. If I do a rivers project, we can do something from where the origin of the rivers around in their own village. Where is that origin? Where did it start? All this is their information coming to the table. So it is equity. It's not only what the teacher gives or the other children from other environment gives. Every child has its own history to bring onto the table. That way, I feel, in a way, you're exploring not only other subjects or what we call disciplines in an interactive way, or some way seamlessly connected to each other for the children to know. So because if the fact is that they're diverting their attention. If I was going to talk about a leaf can be taught about botanically, can be taught about chemically. Then what about the history of the tree, geographically, whether this belongs to this place or not? What about the history of the tree itself? Has it come here? Is it originally here? So every subject can be explored with just one leaf as a subject. Similarly, in that way, each one will bring their own histories. Yes, this is what we saw in our village. This is what I saw in my town, or in what my mother said, or my grandmother said, whatever. So all those information that comes to the table brings in a lot of individual input, individual voice of everyone in the classroom, and therefore establish equity. If you can show me that video for a minute. We're almost there.
No, with the video.
First,
Okay, fine. That's all. Just a clipping.
Have you shared the screen?
So one minute.
That's it.
Wait one.
That's the one.
Namaskar, sir. Even
People in front are showing you the name of the instruments and the variety they are also showing what it is. They picked it from the forest, all of them. Those they are coming at the different countries.
Yeah, stop it.
Still coming. Yeah, so just proceeding from what you said, so if I understand you right, it's also a question of being able to experience different ways of learning, and through the process also creating a conversation that is about the uncomfortable aspects of social life.
Yes, yes.
But this also, I think, raises another question: is the whole notion of knowledge itself, because we have framed knowledge in a certain manner, especially in a school, in terms of curriculum, in terms of, for example, what is in the classroom is knowledge. It's taken for granted, and that needs to be also talked about. Is everything in a classroom really knowledge? Is something we don't ask. Similarly, these words like extracurricular activities, or things that happen outside the classroom, or what you actually referred to when they said there were different ways of accessing knowledge, which is what I want to get back to. So how does one create equity in knowledge? Because equity in knowledge is also very important, is it? Because you also have a constraint of a curriculum, constraint of a board exam, constraint of all these things, right? But how does one create, because first of all, the teachers, let's talk about the students even later. How do you create equity in understanding knowledge among the teachers?
When we say knowledge, normally what we mean? Knowledge that's something that's a way to a profession, way to a job. When what we know as knowledge in an institution, I study this subject, this is a job I will get, this much I will learn. That is a track in which knowledge goes in an institutional knowledge. But knowledge is not that. Knowledge is your understanding of life itself is knowledge. Is the knowledge that you gain from your environment. Your experiences is your knowledge. Your interaction with things around you is knowledge. So when I talk about the community who live in the forest, their knowledge is not considered as knowledge because it's not irrelevant to a profession. It's not relevant to a job, but that is knowledge. They know how to cross a wild stream. That is knowledge, right? The child can identify a gooseberry tree from a distance of about almost about 500 yards. He can identify and say that is a gooseberry tree. That is knowledge, right? The knowledge that they have gained out of their own experience is their knowledge. So how can you say whatever is in the book is only knowledge? Book is not the only knowledge source. Knowledge source is your environment. Knowledge source is your life. Knowledge source is how you interact with people. So knowledge has got it's a misnomer in this area. You can't say it is only that which leads you to profession, but that which fulfills you as life.
So, I mean, how do you gave us one example in the soil example, but in an everyday classroom, how do you bring this aspect of multiplicity in knowledge, if I can use that term, into the way the learning is happening? Because most of your teachers I know come from the community, but they're also teachers from outside.
Yes.
So there must be a bridge that you need to also build there. So how do you create a classroom where all these knowledges, shall we say, coexist and interact in some manner? What do we do in a classroom?
So I speak about this methodology because it gives scope for expressing yourself in various ways, not necessarily as what you studied in a textbook and answers questions. You can make a variety of expressions, say whether they express it in poetry, or they express it in song, or they express it in a drama, role play, or children can express it in dance movements, right? We can encourage them to express in different ways in which they are most out of painting. So many children express themselves in painting. So I feel a multiplicity of talent is available with the children. You encourage that talent as well. Also, you hone those talents in a way that they can express not necessarily in words, in many other ways. In that way, I feel a theme-based, because you can make models, you can make charts, you can make drawings, you can make whatever way the child feels like
Are you
expressing.
also saying that a lot of the knowledge that is gained, that is already there, one of the impediments is the fact that we want that knowledge to be written? Is that also what you're saying? Because a lot of the knowledge that comes from outside the classroom, it comes seamlessly. And the expression of that is very rarely in a written form, right? True. It is in the body. So I think I want to just go to the idea of the body, because I think that's another thing we don't discuss, because the body is the vehicle of knowledge. Knowledge as something that's there and not something that's here.
We see knowledge only that comes from the brain.
Yeah, I mean, even the brain is, in fact, it's external.
It's right out there in the book.
It's not even your brain.
Yes,
it's in the
somebody
book.
else's brain.
Exactly. So I'm saying, are you saying that by using, shall we say, art, I'm using it as a generic term here, it allows for that knowledge to be shared along with read text and written text?
Sure.
The
The fact is, it makes it easier for them to address the concepts which are given in written word when we address it in a different form, and then they can come back to the word. Then that word makes most meaning. That's what my experience tells me.
Interesting. I can just go on talking, but I'm going to try and move the ways. I want to say just one more thing about what you said in between about this idea that education is, rather the idea of a school is driven with the idea of the market providing a job. I wouldn't call it work.
Yes.
So I think we would reframe that. It's you learn so that what market provides, you can cater to. Rather than you say you learn and the environment will actually embrace your learning. That's not the world we live in, right? So I want to ask you this question specifically to your school. Because especially when it comes to schools that cater to people who belong to marginal sections of society, there is almost a belief that you have to have the school so they get jobs. It's more so for people who are in marginal sections. The belief that, they need a job. Make sure they get a job. We can talk about all this open learning, all this interactive, all this nonsense, mumbo jumbo's intellectual activity, all sounds good. But what? At the end of the day, they have to get a job. What are you talking about, right? So there is this very, very interesting belief that exactly the people who say this will then send their children to school where the mind is open, where the heart is free, and all this, those euphemisms are thrown, including me, right? So I'm using myself. So I'm saying, isn't that such inequity in the perception of what the role of education itself is? One. Two, why do we think that a job is contesting an open learning system? Why do we think an open learning system will not provide a person who can be occupationally functional in society? That you posited both them as being some way contesting, opposed to one another.
Yes.
What do you think?
But that is true. That is the misconception that we have. That you have an open system of liberal ways of learning, of giving opportunity to learn in their own styles or in their own way, somehow does not drive them to the market, if I can put it. Ultimately, they have to score the marks, they have to get the ranks, and they have to get, only then they can go to a better college, only then they can get a better job. So the fact that we have made institutions like an industry, all human products that we send out of this industry, and then mark them as fail. It's just we throw one product out and say fail, and this is pass. That is how our concept of education itself is. That's where the whole fallacy that's where the contradictions of having an open school and one driven to marks comes. Ultimately, parents, what do they say? Let my child get a good mark, let him go to a better school, let him go to a better college, let him get a better job. He must start with a 4-figure salary, 5-figure salary.
So how do you deal with this with parents? Can you tell us that?
Well,
Because it's a reality.
it's a reality. That's a reality that we are all fighting with.
So
It's a reality.
So what's the conversation?
So only conversation I can think of is ultimately when they start the board exams, parents will pressurize you to see that they pass creditably. Okay, and initially they also believe that a system like this will not get them through the exam at all because they feel that it's too much freedom. They don't have any discipline. They don't study at times.
Someone just close that door.
And there's a sound coming up. So that is how it is. But then the fact that this way of learning gives a tremendous amount of self-confidence, self-assurance, and this sense of self-esteem builds with this learning on self-learning model, if I would put this as self-learning model. And therefore, in life, these are values that we have. It is whether they hit the job market or not. So at least in my mind, I feel up to at least at the time when the board doesn't start pressurizing us, we can give them this freedom to address or rather develop these qualities in them, and then they will be able to address the future in a better way, in a more competent way, is my belief.
I mean, from your experience also, if I may add, I think it's true that your students have done both, right?
Yes.
They have written their exam, they
Yes,
passed their
yes,
exams, and
yes.
they've had a system by which they are able to explore many things.
That is
Right.
true. That is what gives me the confidence to say that this system works, this method works, because nobody knows till we have experimented it and seen success in not just getting the high marks, but the fact that they have fast-paced interviews. They have spoken to a panel of 4 professors from a different college, and they were able to very easily address them and speak to them with confidence and answer. That itself is I think, coming from a village down somewhere in the remote forest and coming into an institution, and then moving on with such a competency and confidence is, I think, a success of a method.
Yeah, many things, but I would just go to one aspect, which is we spoke about, and here I want to bring up art, obviously,
Yes.
the conversation.
Yes.
So the whole idea that we talked about, that in a way, all these schools need to find their own way of being able to provide honest and open education. At the same time, find a way to have these children be productive, if I can say that, in a post-school scenario, right? Now, but at the same time, there's this other thing, right? I come as an artist, and what we understand as productive, art is not involved in that. Art is not a productive activity as far as India is concerned. We don't consider art a productive, because we want to, something's productive if you can quantify it. So if I can tell you that because these people are so many numbers of X are doing so many things, this is being added to the GDP, everybody is happy. Or somebody can say that this is the percentage of contribute something, but in art you can't really quantify that. What is T.M. Krishna's contribution is you can't quantify. It can be from 0 to 100, it can be anything, depending on where you come from. So here, I want to talk about 2 things, and I want to address this whole idea of art in school, right? And I want to address it in 2 ways. And I believe that concept is itself conceptually thought of in an unequal manner. And I want to say why I think that first. So when we say art in school, everybody seems to agree. Yes, we should have art in school. And they'll quote from 15 books and tell us all the books told us how art helps children learn better. But nobody asks the question, Which art? Is
What kind of art?
and what kind of art? So the interesting question to ask is, how are we making that first decision? Because I think that reactive sense that when I say I want music in school, we know which music will not be in school. That comes from entirely an unequal way of thinking. Because we think certain modes of art, certain modes of sound, certain modes of movement will be good for school. Certain modes of sound, certain modes of dance, certain modes of poetry will not be good for school. And this actually comes from the fact that our society is fundamentally discriminatory. So we have to, I just want to bring this up here because we all find great pleasure in saying art in school. Principally, we can't disagree with it. But I think we have to probe more. When we say artist, I'm not even talking, an artist sort of thought of in two ways, right? One is, how does art help math? How does art help science? So art by itself has no role. Why can't just there be art? It doesn't have to have a reason. So we have two ways. Either we say we plug in certain kind of art forms because we think, coming from our habituation, that is good for these children. Their art, if I may use an othering word, and I'm saying in othering manner, their art is good to show. It is good to demonstrate. It's good to say, look, we are also participating in the local culture. I'm not accusing you of that. By the way, I'm not. I'm just
I'm saying the flip side also is there.
Which is the flip
Yes,
side?
oh, we are promoting.
Yes, that's also there. I agree. But both ways. Yeah, that also I agree. So, but I'm saying that we need to be a little careful about this. My first point I want to say, we'll be very careful about this. Because if there's an environment, the beginning, the previous session I said, we don't realize how we think. The notion of beauty is where this is all coming from. And our fundamental design is to presume notions of beauty. So if you're beginning a school, when you are the outsider, honestly, especially in most cases, you're probably the outsider. So notion is, what is that cultural notion of beauty in that area? Or the multiplicity of it? What is the tonal variance? Where does that have a role in, shall we say, the idea of equity in the atmosphere in the school? That's one. That's the first part. The second is, if we say we want music, what music? If I say music in South India, everybody will start singing Sarigama Padanisa. I don't know why. Why should they sing Sarigama Padanisa? Or they'll sing semi-classical bhajans. Nobody will sing a Kutupata. Because you can't even think of what a Kutupata is a very popular way of singing among marginalized communities in Tamil Nadu. You would automatically think that has no role in the classroom. That is not even part of your imaginative spectrum. So I'm just saying that we need to think a little deeper about this idea of art in class. What art? Why art? And can this art just be? And you also must realize, when you formalize something, it becomes respectful. When you informalize something, it is not respected. So we make that discrimination in every school premises. When something is informal, outside activity, it is different from when it is a classroom activity. And the students, the teachers, everybody knows which is placed where.
I totally agree. Once you make it like an extracurricular, teachers even don't respect it. Don't respect it in the sense that's extracurricular activity. Doesn't matter if they don't go to extracurricular today. I need a class for science. They'll cancel those classes, but they will not cancel any of the academics because they think that's the most important thing in the classroom. So the bias comes in when you say this is outside the curriculum and this is inside the curriculum. Unless you make both part of the curriculum, then they have even then that mindset is there, right? Mindset. This is skills only. It doesn't matter. That kind of attitude is there. Attitude for knowledge basis.
Yes, much time do we have?
So we need to have a little bit of Q&A, so it can take another 10 minutes.
I'll finish in 5. Just one other thing, going back to art, is we don't even think art as a serious post-serious endeavor is considered as a part of a possible profession for any of these children. Not even considered, right? So it's not even thought of. Even if the child, for example, wants it.
Even if the child wants it, the mother will first ask her, what are you going to do about it?
So there is an external problem here also, which we have to recognize. And because it's not a problem that comes from the school system, it comes from our understanding of what works, what doesn't work, is that it's also a fact for many art forms, there is no place to go for these children, which is also true. I mean, as much as we can be self-critical of the school, but we also have to see, okay, fine, but where do they go? And there is a huge vacuum there for many art forms. Where do they go if they finish 12th and they want to become a dancer, irrespective of the form? How do they go? We don't know within our education system a pathway to provide them that access. For some we do, but for some we don't. And even for the ones we do, the gap is too much, the hurdles are huge. So I think that is also something that needs to be taken into consideration. It's not just art, it could be anything, it could be sports too for that matter, it could be anything else. How do schools that work in the grassroots actually push for a change in the external environment also, for multiplicity of people coming out of the school? I think that is also something that needs to be thought out.
Apart from that, I think also, if you would look at art, students pursuing want to do higher art, and even otherwise, I think schools from where marginalized children pass out, they need hand-holding for a very long time. It's not enough. You say they're past 12th, now they have to find their own way. It doesn't happen. Because I think the exposure and the awareness that we have, that others maybe in an urban area have, and the backing that they have, which they do not possess. So therefore, they have to be held forward, and for a very long time. It's not enough just you say 12th is over and then you leave the school and now you fend for yourself. It doesn't happen that way. You have to handhold them for a very long time. That even where you have to go, where they have to study, where the job is available for them, give that the space for them to work through these things, discuss with them. That has to be done with the school. So school has a larger role in when they are dealing with children from the marginalized communities, because for them to take them forward and have 12 years of being with them, you almost feel like parents to them, right? That we have to see them through to a better future.
Finally, something you touched upon in the previous session, I'd like to finish with that. The idea of inspiration, because inspiration comes largely from the teacher.
Yes, correct.
We all have had inspiring. That's working, in the margins. And you do have sometimes teachers coming from different places with different mind frames, with different notions of education. So how does one, in a way, nurture that person to be inspiration? That even makes sense. But anyway, how does one do that? You have to engage in that, right? How does one do that?
True. You very well, everybody says teacher is to be the role model. What do you mean by role model? What's your role model for? Right? That's the idea of inspirational teachers. And of course, the inspiration in a marginalized school is by bringing teachers from the same community coming to work in the school, which they have not done so far at all. And that's what I was, even earlier session, I was telling them that when you recruit teachers from the community, when they start going to school, they're made fun of, everybody says, oh, this lady's becoming stylish, walking with this bag on her shoulder, and she thinks she's going to earn a lot of money. So that is the attitude of the community. But once they have come into school and they see that their children who are in the same institution are benefiting by their teaching or by their association, and then they have also added to their qualifications and they've grown in their stature as a teacher, the respect from the community comes. So in that way, I feel then they become inspirational, because that's why many children from the same community will start saying, I want to be a teacher. I want to be a teacher. Because then they see that there's possibility of their own community people growing up to be respected teachers. I think that way you can say they can be experienced. And then this kind of added image that they create, they become women empowered, right? And they stand for election in panchayat. One of my teachers is standing for election in the panchayat president's post. So imagine about 15 years before. Would Chitra have ever thought of that? No. That's what. So that is an aspiration and inspiration for others. For them, that it gives them the freedom not only to be empowered, but be equity, because they can stand for a public position.
So if people have any questions, they can start asking the questions. So I'll start by asking a question. So one of the things that I found a little disturbing in both your presentation is that a lot of knowledge, I do agree, is relative. That is kind of, it's subjective in the sense that it is a lived personal experience of a person or a community or a group of people. But there is a lot of knowledge that is very objective, very formal, which can be taught in a fairly equal manner to everyone. And we are failing in that. So there wasn't much to address that. So for example, like most of maths and science and whatever that we teach is fairly common across all the people and fairly objective, fairly so this thing was, most of the conversation was about the kind of things which are subjective rather than about the kind of things which are objective.
Well, I think a presumption that something is subjective needs to be challenged first. The knowledge of a gooseberry tree is not subjective knowledge. Let me finish. So I think that first of all is that subjective knowledge. The gooseberry tree is actually objective knowledge. How it is perceived is the subjective part. So I think we should be, I want to be cautioned, be very, very careful here. Because here you're placing objectivity and subjectivity based on the way it is received. Now, all we are saying is that the objective knowledge by itself cannot be equal unless, or what you call objective knowledge, or classroom knowledge, or math knowledge, cannot be equal unless varied ways of perceiving knowledge, which includes perceiving knowledge beyond the classroom, is interacting with this aspect of read knowledge or taught knowledge. And we are failing exactly because of the fact that we're not allowing this interaction. Because equity will happen when a child who sees a design every day in a manner relates that design to a triangle in a book. What you call subjective and what you call objective, I'm saying perceived in different ways. What we are doing is we are negating that experience and saying learn the triangle. Now every child will not see the triangle from the same line. It becomes unequal because of that. If we instead say, of course, this is a knowledge we need to learn. I don't think we're disagreeing in that point, that you need to know the math, you need to know the whatever, you need to know theorem, etc. But if there is a way we can respect other ways of learning that happens in life and allow it to interact in this, then we allow each different child to be able to use what it's learned to further access what is in the textbook. You want to say something?
In fact, I would like to go a step further, is that in the practice of Rajaram, in the professional domain of knowledge, the hegemony of empiricism, positivism is long challenged in most of the field, which is something that we hold on to very dearly because that is objectifiable, standardizable. And when it comes to education, that hegemony is highly entrenched. We want very simple kind of standardized knowledge, what we call knowledge, which can be easily tested, which can be then assessed in a very easy manner. If you look at history, geography, I would only stick to the subjects that I am I have knowledge of. is that the kind of history that is practiced in the professional domain or the kind of geography that is practiced in the professional domain is not at all exposed, the teachers are not exposed to those ideas, nor is that glimpse there in the syllabus and the curriculum. So in fact, in terms of understanding the various kind of positions that are there, vis-a-vis the Enlightenment idea of what we understand positivist science and empiricism is something that has long been questioned. And there are many, many facets of it in real professional domain, which we do not allow to be entered into. So either it can be woven very clearly into pedagogy. One of the examples that he gave was, or she gave was of a tree, or the experiments that children do. We take children immediately into a lab and start making them look at how the paper turns color by dipping it in the paper, in the solution. We don't allow them to bring their own experiences from the kitchen, and then you can look at issues of gender, you can look at issues of caste in very interesting way if you did that. So it is possible, and schools do that, colleges do that, colleges work with professional teachers to unlearn these hegemonies of positivism.
I think one of the reasons why the point you made, there is inequality in teaching what is empirically accepted, is because of the lack of this synergy, this lack of, I would say, respect at some level of different learnings, whether it's the kitchen or whether it's anywhere else. So I think one of the things is we have to find a way that is always part of that conversation of what is coming in the textbook, which needs to be done as we all know.
And of course, there's the handicap. You have to give them the handicap. Everybody comes in there, everybody has to learn it. But then how they learn it, people, as I said, students learn from different environments, will have to reach them. But then equity comes when you give them that time and the handicap to reach them. So that at some time they will have to learn that. But then you can't just throw them into that space and say, you're in this place and so you have to start off there. But the preparation is different for different children, different communities, different exposures that the child has. So that kind of the time and the little advantage which others have, which some children do not have, we should be aware of it. Then I think whatever be the pedagogy can be addressed.
How do you see role of technology in bringing equity to education? Yeah.
I said not me.
Because it has almost become way of life now. So how do
Using post-COVID, right? Are you saying that?
In general, I'm saying.
Okay. Well, post-COVID, technology has been a disaster, if you ask me. For the simple reason that all of us, schools, teachers, everybody was asked to have online classes for students, right from the kindergarten up to the class 12, kindergarten children watching phones, wanting to understand, and none of this happens. I mean, they believe that technology will enable learning, but then the enabler is a cell phone or whatever be. But the child is not prepared to accept that accept that tool itself. So where is the enabling happening? So that especially, okay, if parents are educated and children are able to get some information or access to the gadgets and they are guided into learning, maybe. But you know how our country is. What's the percentage of children who can access these tools, right? And so having phones, having laptops is out of, just not imagine, you can't imagine. I remember during this COVID time, we said, okay, we have to help the children. We bought cell phones and we said, we gave them cell phones. Third day, cell phone gone. You know, it broke, nothing happened. Children didn't come to the class. We said, why? We gave you phones, no internet. So where are you going to answer these questions about technology enabling? Enabler it is, but then two, they must know how to utilize that enabling tool, how to not misuse those enabling tools, and then what to derive out of it. They must be guided to how can they learn to use the tool to their advantage or to their learning process. That is a learning by itself. I think that's a course they have to be conducted before a tool is given to them.
Can I just add something? I think it's also got to do with intent of technology, if I can use that term, right? Because we somehow think technology will solve most of these problems. But technology is not going to do anything by itself unless we also kind of investigate the intent. When the intent does not recognize the fact that society is so complex and so uneven, then the technology is not going to do what we want it to do. I'm not saying technology cannot do. I'm just saying, I'm not dissing it, right? But I'm saying you just give a software, you just put an app in a phone, it doesn't become accessible to everybody. So that means you're not even thinking while you're making that about the reality of society and how can we enable that. So that's got to do with our thinking beyond technology. And I want to give a human angle also to this whole online session. This story told to me by a principal of a college in Tamil Nadu. He said when they started online classes, his attendance dropped to about 20%. Some people had the usual connectivity issues, they never phone, etc. But he said some people came and told him something that he never expected. Students came and said, I don't want my classmates to see my home. I don't want them to see where I live. And so I won't come to class. This is something that I didn't strike me. They didn't come to class because they didn't want their classmates to see their living space. So it's interesting that we never even think of possibilities such as this when we create these tools. So I think we should think about how we are creating these tools and not say that it's all a waste, but can we think about this?
So there are questions on the chat box from the US. So if I may ask. So education is still seen by many parents as a symbol of status, from the poor who admit their children in English medium schools to the richest who get their children admitted abroad. How do you bring equality with this prevailing thought process?
God, I don't know whether there's an answer to that question. So the idea was education is always still seen as a status symbol, and the poor want to admit their children in English medium schools, the elite want to send their children abroad. So, I mean, I think we touched upon this in the short session, but this has got to do with our entire structure of education in this country. So it's very difficult for us to really answer that specifically. Like I said, the whole public and private school system is a system of caste discrimination. Let's start from there. But we know exactly the bandwidth of social community that goes to public school. Then moving to English school is, by the way, a way of escaping that too. It is not just a question of, it's actually aspirational, because when you move to an English school, it's not just economic upgradation, it is social upgradation. Sorry? Yes, there is social status. So English learning also is a way of hiding maybe your caste background. There are so many complicated things webbed into this. So we have to look at that. Look at private schools. Private schools have different categories. And depending on the category, you know the bandwidth of people that are coming. And even there is an aspiration. The ultimate aspiration is, of course, the elite alternative school. Like the school I went to. It's the ultimate aspiration, right? So this entire model, if you look at it, and going abroad is just an extension of that, right? So if you have an entire going to break that model. There is no one good answer, I think, to your question. Unless we're willing to really reimagine this entire structure, or at least, like many of you here are doing, reimagine the private space. in a manner that is different because the public space is what it is. So I think it requires a much larger reframing of education policy itself for us to address this status-related hierarchy that is there in which school does your child go?
And also the language. You see, the English medium school, as they said, what to do? English is some status symbol. If you speak English, definitely you're a different status, right? And if you speak your own mother tongue, you're not. So that kind of language hierarchy there is, right? Therefore, you speak English and you speak Hindi and you speak your mother tongue and then you speak the other languages. So there's a hierarchy of language. So the fact that people can speak English and that's why they go to English medium schools and the status is improved is basically because of this language hierarchy. If I'm an MA in Tamil, am I equal to an MA in English? Never. Both are masters, right? But then we are not considered that way. So that's the difficulty.
Amrish,
Yes.
would you like to ask a question?
Yes, yes, please.
You're probably on mute.
Can you hear me?
Can't hear you, Amrish. You might want to unmute yourself.
Mute, unmute. No, I'm unmuted.
Amrish, it seems like the speaker over there is not catching our voice. So you may want to type your message.
Amrish, would you like to type your question in the chat box?
I have already put it in the
You can ask
chat
that
box.
question.
It's in the chat box.
In the meantime,
Microphone settings speakers.
So we'll probably just keep to the last couple of questions.
Can people hear me now?
Amrish, we can hear you here, but I don't think they are hearing over there.
Okay, it's. I am on the my question is in the chat box also.
Yeah, we are letting Rajaram know. We are just
Okay, thank you.
calling him. Yeah, just give him few seconds.
Okay.
Bottom. The chat bottom.
Oh, yeah, it's there. Now, would you like me to read it?
Yes, please.
My education on the top of education. I'm sorry. He's from Princeton. On the topic of education equality, do you or do you not agree that the country is moving toward increasing inequality? If your answer is yes, what are some of the practical things that you suggest an organization like Asha should be doing to foster equality, equity beyond Asha projects?
Well, yes, I agree with you. I think there's disagreement there. This probably requires a long discussion than solution providing your statements. It probably requires a long discussion. I can speak from the cultural sphere because that's the sphere I work in. I think we have to create a habit of how we understand each other and coexist in every, not just school spaces, but social spaces. How can we engage with children beyond the school, even in the evening? We all know the things that we sang or the things that we learned when we were children is something we never forget. It stays with us. So the question is, how can we inculcate that kind of cohabitation and understanding of what it means to live with diversity in things that we do within the school from right at the beginning. But beyond the school, I actually think every village must have an evening program where children come and sing together, dance together, and they do theater together, and they talk to each other, irrespective of where they are from. Because only way you can, I think, inequality can be looked at in economic terms, economic empowerment, but inequality is here. You know, a rich Dalit is not equal to a rich Brahmin, very bluntly put. That's inequality. So the question is, how do we create that conversation in a child to be able to share spaces? to be able to eat together, to be able to see each other's beauty. So I think if we can actually work in creating cultural centers, if you want, for lack of another word, in small towns, districts, in whatever way we can, I think our worry is not about the inequality that's increasing at this moment. I am very worried about the next generation and the next generation and the amount of hatred that is being fed to them. I am very, very worried about that. And if that has to change, we have to find ways by which we can use, I think art has a great role to play here. We can use art, theater, cinema, music, dance, movement, poetry to nurture this idea of being able to sit together, smile, laugh, have differences, but yet be able to love in some manner, because I think we are really lacking in love.
There is Amresh. I know
Yes,
that.
yes. Can people hear me?
Yeah.
Yes.
We can hear you. Okay.
I just wanted to add one more point. That because you asked particularly what Asha can do, and I've been there for just 1.5 days. But what I've heard here and what I perceived from earlier is that already you are recognizing people who are working with marginalized people, right? It's not like Asha is not recognizing. You are recognizing, you're supporting. I would say what is more important is to recognize how that recognition comes to a formal space when they interact. So they can think about that very carefully. I think, like, in the sense, it cannot be assumed that everybody will be sensitized. You know, when she was talking about, that's my feeling. My question was, is that it connects to that. I was asking that in terms of intention. Okay, let's say there is an intention which we are saying in government schools, where schooling itself, by and large, is public schools. Okay, although it's not happening, we know that it's not happening, right? The way we would like.
Yes.
And there, here, many people had a discussion of creating a same school where everybody has an access to that school. You know, whether in terms of quality or whether in terms of inclusivity or integration. My question is, how would you think, because you were talking about art and you were talking about also the classroom and interactions, how do you accountable? Like, how do you think, you know, as teacher body or a school environment, where is the accountability for that? If that is not happening.
Let me see if
I
I'm-
understand that's what you're
You're saying how do you create accountability, or how do you create a model? I don't like the word, but I'll still use it. I know, how do you create a way by which there is an accountability about the intention? Now, intention of who? Institution, teachers, what are you talking about?
Like, let's say even teachers, let's say teachers,
right.
okay? Because we were talking a lot about teachers, yeah?
Correct.
So let's say, because we've heard so many stories where people have been humiliated by teachers.
True, true.
You know, so what I'm trying to ask here is that how do you make sure that the intention of a teacher in a space is their
The
accountable?
person is accountable.
Yes, okay. I think it has to come top down. The intent must come from top down, from the management. From then, they have to make it very explicit in their own behavior, in their own actions, in relation to students, in relation to other teachers. Have to extend that feeling of oneness. Somehow not dividing among teachers. You know, those who belong to this community or those who belong to that community, or therefore that equity, or giving the same status whether the teacher is coming from a rural background or whether the teacher is coming from a tribal background. The respect that we give is what I think is something that has to come from the top. There is no differentiation of any kind, or because of their background, or because of whether they are poor or rich. That has to come from the top. It has to come. Otherwise, it will not trickle down to the
What
rest of the
happens if something happens in a class? No, I
Well,
just want to ask, just give you a role play. Suppose in spite of all your signals and all your workshops, etc., something happens in a class. And it happens. We know that despite all this, things do happen.
Right.
So what is the accountability there? That I think that's also something.
Your body language.
Yeah, that's also something Purna was asking. So if it happens, it could happen, like she said, could be the body language, could be in a casual slur, if I can say the casual slur. So what happens? What's the accountability there? How does the institution address that issue?
I think it needs counseling. The teacher needs to be counseled as to say that this is this philosophy on which the school is running, and therefore this has to be imbibed. This cannot be taught. They have to see the feeling. They have to feel the same way. You read about that Krishna Kumar's thing about a boy in Beetle being beaten up because he broke a bucket or something in a government school. I mean that kind of cruelty is existent. I know, because I even went for a meeting with NCRT with tribal teachers from other government tribal schools, and all that they could say was they are no good. They cannot be taught. They don't speak well. The fact is that negative image is what they have in their minds. And therefore, when we are going to engage them as our teachers, we have to do definitely tremendous amount of counseling to the teacher and teacher's attitude to students. That's something very, very, very individualistic, but that has to be done through example, mostly taught through example.
But there is another dimension. The teachers will definitely behave with the talks of the town, that they have to respect the child, they have to respect every religion, they have to respect, they don't have to utter about the caste, they have to understand they should not discriminate about the caste or anything. But when they get out of premises, that after the top, wherever in their life, because the rest of the world is teaching them about everything.
Yes.
The knowledge of the teacher also is determined by how the society works.
No doubt.
And that reflects. So in the premises of Asha, they will behave wonderfully well. But as soon as they go out, they discriminate, they talk against the other religion, they talk about everything which we don't want.
That's the problem of every one of us. All of us are the same way, right? When we come out, when we move out of a situation, we're also bombarded with these ideas of diversity, of discrimination. And therefore, if we have to rise above that, then we have to work on ourselves.
Yeah, in fact, one of the points I've written down, which I didn't raise, is I actually asked the question, is actually equity possible in schools?
Yes.
When equity doesn't exist in reality outside?
Exactly.
So that was one of the questions I didn't bring it up. So that is also something. So I think the extension is, how does a school go beyond its compound wall? I think that's an important question that probably also addresses your point, is can a school go beyond its premises? Because it can't become a bubble of equity.
And it's just sham. It's not reality. It's sham.
Exactly. So, but I mean, I don't think I'll be as harsh and say it's a sham, but I'll just say that it's controlled. It's controllable, right? It's controlled. But I'm saying,
like honestly, not speaking, that's almost like that.
Yeah, I agree. No, I agree. No, I agree. I'm not disagreeing with you. But I'm just saying, so I think that's the complex question on how does a school go beyond its campus? And how does it have the larger conversation? So through a generation or two, what you said probably is at least diminished, if not disappeared. I think that's.
What is the cross section of the?
No, that I feel that if equity is somehow a sense of equity comes into the classroom among the students, I think they will take it forward into the village. I think
they take it to the bench.
Yes, I think so. My feeling is that.
So it's the way that you create value in that child,
yes,
that they will have to carry the rest of their life.
I feel that. I think that's where we can work. We can't go into the community and work, but we can work with the children. At least the next generation will come up with it in the community.
So there's one more question here. It's a long-winded question. So give me a minute now. So I think all panelists agree that the knowledge that is formalized or respected is the knowledge that can be monetized. Can we bring about a change in perception by helping knowledge that is not respected by enabling monetization? For example, if we help a skilled artisan in a village to sell directly in the marketplace by using technology or teaching business skills and help him or her to earn a good living, can we bring about a change in perception?
Well, I think first there are a lot of people doing that. I mean, let's acknowledge that first. There are a lot of people working in that area, whether it's artisanal work, whether it is textiles, etc. Especially textiles, it's been happening for decades actually. The whole Dastkar movement is part of exactly what you pointed to. Yes, we can, I agree. But I'm not going to be able to answer this because this is a very complex cultural question that needs probably a separate session for. Because the idea of monetization must also be inclusive of the community itself, right? I'll give you an example. That has happened. So you have hand-woven sarees or organic hand-woven sarees. And so it has a market now. And the artisan is, shall we say, the weaver, at least some of them are benefited by that loop that has happened. But you'll never see that sari being worn in that village. Okay? And the perception of what they wear will be considered as crude stuff. So we are creating a market, yes, but exactly. I like to say that all of India is Fab India too. Because we all believe that is Indian colors. We believe that is Indian aesthetic, right? So, but I'm saying, so what happens here? What are we doing here? I'm just saying something I'm just putting one point over there of saying, yes, there is a market, but if that cloth, that sari is not there in that village where it is made, what are we doing here? What are we doing here? You know, and sometimes it happens in case of music, I know. For example, everybody now knows the Manganiyars from Rajasthan. They know few Manganiyars, not all the Manganiyars. Okay? Some of the Manganiyars have become famous. Okay? But the Manganiyar community is exactly where it is. They are still discriminated against. They are still bottom of the ladder of social structure. Few years ago, a Manganiyar was killed because his singing did not evoke some booth or something like that. So now, from outside, I would see it and say, look, I go from, look, the Manganiyars are now enabled, they're having concerts at the big stage. Exactly. But when that respect is not happening at the place of its creation, you're creating a different set of inequalities. Among them, between cities, rural, there's so many things. So I'm just saying, yes, and still complicated.
Sorry, so the next stage is a continuation of this. Actually, I would like to invite both Purnima and Simantini to also come to the stage.
Here.
Yeah, please. He can make his point.
सवाल नहीं था कि हम सवाल करें किससे जो हम लोग यहाँ बैठे हैं हम तो खुद में एक सवाल है तो हम जब कोई ऐसी अथॉरिटी तो है नहीं जिससे ये सारे जो सवाल उठ रहे हैं जिन चीजों को हम लोग देख रहे हैं रियलाइज भोग रहे हैं इन सवालों को करने का और इनका जवाब देने का जिनके पास जिन हुक्मरानों के पास जिनके लिए चीजें हैं वो तो है नहीं ये हम सब तो सवाल हैं हम ही जवाब हैं हमारे कॉन्स्टिट्यूशन में बहुत सारी बातें बहुत आइडियल लिखी हुई हैं जिन बातों को हम लोग यहाँ कर रहे हैं कि हमारे सिलेबस में हमारे करिकुलम में वही तो हमारा कॉन्स्टिट्यूशन में भी है लेकिन हमारे प्रैक्टिकल में क्या है तो उसी के लिए हम सब हैं और मुझे लगता है जैसे सीमंतनी जी वहां बैठी हैं कल वो बता रही थी कि बहुत सारा जेंडर डिस्क्रिमिनेशन के बारे में उन्होंने सिलेबस कोर्स बनाया है मॉरल वैल्यू और इन सब चीजों पे जब हम बात करते हैं तो जहां हमारा होल्ड है वहां हम क्या कर सकते हैं जैसे हम जिस स्कूल में बैठे हैं मतलब आप अगर कोई एजुकेशन चला रहे हैं तो कम से कम हमारा यहाँ एक और आशा और हम सब का एक वैल्यू एजुकेशन तो ये होना चाहिए कि कम से कम यहाँ टॉयलेट जो है वो फ्री हो वो बॉयज गर्ल मतलब एक कॉन्सेप्ट तो मगर मेन स्ट्रीम में है तो हमारे पास क्यों है हम तो उस डिस्क्रिमिनेशन के खिलाफ लड़ रहे हैं और हम एक न्यूली ह्यूमन बिल्ड करना चाहते हैं, तो वो हमारे पास ना हो, हम उसकी कोशिश करें। और ये सारे सवाल हैं जिसके लिए हम सब हम किसी से ना जवाब चाहते हैं, हमारे सवाल तो है ही, लेकिन हम इन प्रैक्टिकल उन चीजों को अगर जहां जहां अप्लाई कर सके और ये कर सके तो वही हमारी कोशिश ज्यादा कामयाब होगी। थैंक यू।
Here, Rajaram ji, like, can you guys hear us? I just wanted to check if our speaker system in India is
We can
working.
hear you, Binay.
Okay, here, so I just wanted
we
to
can
say
hear
there were
you,
a couple of questions. I think Amrish ji had a follow-up question from last time. So I
I
would,
saw the question, but I think we are running out of time.
okay, so there are a couple of questions. If you can accommodate in the next session somewhere, that will be great. We have Amrish ji's question, and then there is a question from Padmanava.
Sorry, Binay, you will have to repeat. We couldn't
No,
hear you
I
clearly.
So I can tell you what it is. So he says there's only a couple of questions. Can you accommodate in the next session is what he's saying. Yes, we can, Binay.
Okay, so you decide whenever you want, like the Amrish ji has one question and Padmanava has one question. And one from Girish.
We'll ask the question now. Yeah, okay.
You can answer Anand's question.
It doesn't answer the question.
No, but I did want to answer that. Vinay is okay, or you can just share.
No, I thought Binay was not a specific question. Padmanava's question. Yeah, if you read it, yeah, that's fine.
Can you just read the question?
That's what I was doing. Okay. Can we bring values through literature in a proactive way, via libraries and book discussions among students?
Sorry, I was going to answer the previous question, which I read on the monitor.
Okay.
So basically, when TM Krishna was sharing about like the whole art part, he had asked about like village skilled versus what happens when then, you know, like in skilled education. Basically, there was a question in that.
Good.
Yeah. So I want to say that in our space, we try bringing the skilled artisans of the village as educators. So we do something called Craft Week, and that is for 10 days. And after which, throughout the year, the skilled artisans of the village are people who are teachers in our school. Like they have included like tribal teachers. We've included this, and it's amazing how we've had an experience. So that could be done, I'm saying. It's a possibility that in education, creatively, you can have people in the village who are skilled for generations, are recognized. So my point was how a school recognizes. A school, because both of them had shared that how you recognize somebody's work, how do you recognize that this is important, whether it's in a timetable or in your interaction. So I think for skilled artisans, recognition is important.
So should I read the next question again? Yeah. Would you? Okay.
You want to say something?
Sure.
So my question was about the caste system. Even the teachers who are inside the school, they're supposed to, like what we are thinking of, they should be bringing the change that we right now talking about, or the mindset itself. You know, when they are not treated when that's one thing that they are not able to bring that I'm seeing. And how to make them feel aware of their situation and empower them, right? So through, I don't know, it's is this empowering that particular teacher, even that particular group of teachers is something that beyond our hands. I don't feel, you know, that something is there in our hands, I feel, you know, because they are also educated and they have their own mind. I definitely believe that. So what is the way in which that we can address that?
You're saying a group of teachers who are empowered as teachers still feel that they are different from the others. Is that what you're saying?
They accept it.
They accept that. They accept that position.
I am treated differently.
It's okay. It's okay.
She's talking about the normalization.
No, she feels even though they are.
That's what I'm saying. They're normalized in their.
They normalize that difference. They don't even question that difference. That's what you're saying. Well, I think the change must come from not from them. It must come from the other teachers. I think we are now in the position of that power. That's there. I think always the higher in the hierarchy, whether it's the other teachers who think who are in a different position, must be the one who should make them feel. Say no, some way accept them into that group or make them feel that there's no need for them to feel different. They may not express it, but it may come in actions. Even others may not express it, but somehow subtle signals may be coming to them that they catch on. And therefore, they don't complain about it because they feel it's okay. Because that's how I've been treated all my life. But that, I think it has to come from a dialogue with both. You have to talk, sit down and talk, both with the teachers who feel, who have accepted their position, and those who do not recognize it. The others must be made to recognize that they are taking that position. Maybe they not be aware of that because it's so common. That's how it is. So they have to be brought into that focus right in front of their eyes. See, this is what is happening, and that shouldn't be. I think that's the way we have to deal with it. It's my feeling.
Yeah, she spoke about this. So she's talking about a school which is, yesterday I talked about we work with all of the schools in Bombay. And so because we address these issues in the content itself, that we talk about the fact that there is caste discrimination or there is communalism in society, there's gender discrimination. While right away they may not be changed, but there is at least acknowledgement of the fact, both children as well as teachers who don't belong to the upper caste feel that yes, these things are at least out and open. So the change may not start right away, but the teachers who are upper caste, as I think one of you asked this question, is that when the upper caste teachers try to brush these issues under the carpet, children themselves in fact open out and say that no, this is not just there in the villages, it's there today in Bombay also. So it's not something that can change right away, but it's important to talk about it out and open rather than try to find other ways to do it, because there is no other way. We've tried for a long time, and we are going to let it be because it is advantageous to certain sections of the people. You also need to train teachers as well as older children to critically look at what they have been given to study. That habit of analyzing what the content itself that we take for granted needs to be part of the experience of education in formal stream. And so in that sense, it is also open to exposing knowledge to where it comes from, the position of power that it comes from. So there are many ways that it's possible, and just because you do it doesn't mean that everything becomes all right. But at least the validity of these efforts, you need to bring them out in the formal space of the classroom and not get relegated to space outside, which is what we do, because it's not easy to work in formal space.
I would also say one more thing to add to that is awareness is painful in an unequal society. So I would say that many of the teachers may not realize that they are discriminated. They might be in their homes or in their own societies, We've seen that in COVID times, many teachers had told that they were discriminated when they took an initiative in their own communities. It's not that people welcome them. So awareness is painful, but through staying, as Akka was saying, that staying with that pain, like in the sense supporting people, don't lose hope that that would be a way to, like, cross over. It could be done through reading. It could be done through many activities, which we were saying, very logical things, or like that you read more and get exposed more and probably have conversations, as you said, and have a resource where you can have dialogues to cross over that. But I don't think it can be avoided pain. It is painful.
I don't come from educational space, but I can just say a general comment is that the thing about the normalization of these habits is both the person who's it's not a good and bad conversation. It's not an evil person who's a good person. I think that kind of a positioning should first go. Is that person who's discriminated against and the person who's discriminating, both, and I would like to say in many cases, are just doing it out of habit. Right? They don't even see it. Right? They don't even see it. So I think it is if taking up what she said, something should come from the top. It's not just advice that should come from the top. Can the person in power acknowledge their discriminative nature, for example? Could you have a conversation with all your teachers, say, look, I did this. So one of the things is we have to deconstruct power models inside the school. There has to be more vulnerable human beings in the school. Top down. That itself will provide for greater confidence space for people to even start noticing things that they did not notice before.
Can I say something? Can people hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Okay, can everyone hear me? Yeah, on the panelists?
Yeah, go ahead, Amreshji.
Yes, we can.
Okay, all right. So this issue of discrimination, the point that was just made just before, is that the point was that the person who is discriminating and the person who is being discriminated against, both of them may not realize what is happening. So so one of the things that can help in this regard is continuing education through professional development programs on an ongoing basis. This is what is routinely done in the US. So these issues are recognized, and there is a process of education that happens continuously, and these issues are brought to the surface. So that is something to be something to be considered and recommended. Now, inequality. Now, going back to inequality. Inequality is something that I have a lot of interest in, and in New Jersey, very concerted effort has been made to remove the inequality, and the structure that they've put into place is something called the Education Law Center, and it is a non-government organization supported by private funding, supported by donations, and so on. Has many lawyers and has a staff, supporting staff, and their role, and they are doing an outstanding job, and their role is to make sure that the court judgments, the similar things, structures, the similar equivalents in India would be RTE, for example. So RTE has been made into law, but how do you ensure that RTE is actually being implemented? Because I've been to a school in Jhansi, which is a village school with just 2 rooms, and there were 3 classes, 3 grades meeting in a single room, and a single teacher was teaching 3 different grades. So many, few students from one grade, few students from the other grade, and students from the 3rd grade. So those kinds of things exist. Now, the talks that I heard today they're very philosophical and they're talking about pedagogy and stuff like that. But I am more interested in what can be done to at least implement the law. The law is already that is in place, like the RTE, and it cannot be done by the government. It can only be done by people like yourselves and the people that you can mobilize, so that they can point out, yes, this is the law, but this is not actually being done. So what do you do about it? So I see the panelists nodding their heads. Maybe I'm not being heard.
No,
we
heard you well.
We heard you very well.
So
Okay.
RT
So this so I strongly recommend that all of you outstanding educationists, they should look at what this Education Law Center has done. They have an outstanding website, and they of course focus on New Jersey, but also keep track of all the other states. Now, New Jersey is a leader in this field because their allocation, their budget, the amount of money they spend on education to make sure that there is equality and equity, maybe equality/equity throughout the state, is of the order of 40%. 40% of the state budget goes toward education. And the schools where in the inner cities where there is no property tax, basically the amount that they raise through property taxes is virtually zero. But those schools have to be supported. They are completely supported by the state, and they have to be as good in terms of at least per pupil expenditure as the schools in the best areas in the state, like Princeton. So mechanisms have to be put into place, and that is something that that occurred to me, that there are no. I have not seen in the press that there are any mechanisms that question whether the RTE in any state or in Delhi or Union Territory, whether it's actually being, what is the extent to which it's being implemented.
So yeah, I'd like to just humbly submit that we are comparing apples to oranges when we talk about public school system in the US and we talk about public school system or school system in India. You already have a semblance of what we understand as a common school system. People living in the same geography, more or less. I mean, there is a difference and we are aware of that. But here RT is implemented to quite efficiently because it is conceived as an unequal law. RT bars children from their recognizing right to education from 0 to 6, and it doesn't recognize children's right above 14 either. So it makes a difference between the age group difference. It creates disabilities which could well be avoided. It only promises schooling for children between 6 to 14. It does the norms that RT has for public schools particularly are very poor norms. It exposes students and schools to have multi-grade teaching, where teachers have to manage extra academic work, non-academic work, as well as teach 2 to 3 classes and children who have not had any exposure to early childhood education. And there is no guarantee that the child will then actually be able to make sense of what is being done in the class. And then there are private organizations, mega organizations that come out with reports that your child has gone to class 4, but cannot read and write. Is that a surprise? We are creating a class of people who are meant to serve us forever and ever. But we are simply putting out there that there is a law that will ensure that they're in school for 8 years. That is what RT is. RT doesn't touch Kendriya Vidyalayas, Navodaya Vidyalayas, those Sainik schools. It doesn't touch any of the private schools. It only gives 25% provision to some of the schools that have got benefits from the government of land or electricity or so on and so forth. So RT is not at all trying to upset the age-old structure of inequality. It just simply legalizing it, and that act itself needs to change. And it is not easy to move to what was conceived as a common school system in 1966. but it is necessary to build a campaign to make that awareness out there, because just the way a poor child is losing, a child from middle class family is losing as well, because education is not simply there in the books and to give exams. Education is something that is a social experience, not knowing enough about what society I belong to. My education is anemic, as was pointed out by Kothari Commission. And that is the kind of society we have created. And that's why we're talking about inequality. If everybody came to the same school, or at least similar kind of awareness that there's somebody who's different from me, and believe me that people are not so insensitive if they're brought up like that. That while there will be discrimination and inequality, there'll also be awareness about that discrimination and inequality. That's one of the things that's possible. So RT has been implemented very well in our country.
That's the problem.
Sadly not implemented.
Yeah, I can read Padmanabha's question. Can we bring values through literature in a proactive way via libraries and book discussions among students?
So I think again, to have inclusive libraries will be very good. Again, if you're going to include marginalized people and First Generation learners, you need libraries which are very different. Not only, there has to be very sensitive picture kind of books along with reading. And now you also have audio libraries. I would say, like, for many places that's worked very well. Like where you have audio in the library where you can listen to something being read, so that this equity which you're talking about will be actually achieved in the libraries. There is a possibility to bring literature, but that literature, again, the language has to be like really something closer to where the children are coming. So to be sensitive and have the literature in the library is very good. Personally, I have seen beautiful illustrated atlas having globes, this kind of many materials which are very, very child-centered should be in the libraries.
Libraries, certainly they obviously need to be there. I mean, they need to be there for the pleasure of, reading about different experiences of different people and different places and times. But one of the things I think what you're also in context of the larger discussion that we're having, this is one good thing that has happened, at least in state of Maharashtra and some other states, is that in literature, there is languages that are, not the standardized Marathi, but that have very rich literature, and writings from those language streams in Maharashtra are actually part of the Marathi literature syllabus and curriculum. So it's not happened by accident. It's happened because people like us, all of us sitting here, have actually advocated for that, brought that awareness in, in policy. And so some things also change if one persists. So this is one of the good examples. So
actually, your point was.
I have a follow-up question.
Yeah.
I have a follow-up question for Simantini ji. So you trashed RTE, but if you do not have RTE, what other structure do we have in place to enforce anything in education? What do you recommend? Is the first of all, is the country sliding backward? Is there increasing inequality? And if the answer is yes, first of all, I want to know yes or no. You cannot have it. You cannot give me ambiguous answers. Is the country sliding backward in terms of inequality, or things are improving? What do the panelists say sitting on the dais?
The country is certainly sliding backwards, but if RT was somewhat of
RT. So let's come to RT presently. So the country is sliding backward. So I'm looking for solutions. So RTE is a poor solution, you are telling me. Okay, and so what other solution do you have? Please bear with me. I'm serious about it. No, I'm really serious about it. Please allow me to finish. Please allow me to finish. I've been in the field of education, a school teacher for 15 years. So I have a lot of experience, but the experience has been in New Jersey, but it is experience nevertheless. So what I'm trying to say is that the country is sliding backward and RT is no good. So do you recommend that there should be either RT should be scrapped, there should be nothing, or it should be improved upon? Because if you're saying RT is, RT is no good, then what else do we have? How do you, what solution do you offer? I'm looking for solutions, Simantini ji. What solution do you offer?
Yeah, so I'm trying to explain in the way I understand and the way we have been working with RT is that rather than take the view that we need to implement RT well, we take those clauses of RT which are implementable in school in terms of teacher-pupil ratio, in terms of the distance of the school. I have filed a case in the court, for example, demanding that the section 11 of the RT be implemented. I know that the court is not going to immediately grant that. That is about the early childhood education. So when you take up these issues, you work with the community, and through the awareness that the community builds, some things do get implemented. When a school was going to be shut down after children reach 7th standard, the parents fought for it to be continued in 8th standard. Now, this is something very unusual in Bombay where privatization is rampant. And that school is increased now gradually to 10th standard. That is because of parental pressure. But similarly, education of the parents also has happened that this act is not sufficient, that we need to fight for a better act. Now, this is something we've been able to do in some of the places in Bombay where we have people who think alike, and there is a strong network of supporters on ground. I think this kind of a network needs to be built where you work with the law in a creative manner to implement what is implementable. At the same time, there is going to be a backlash because the state doesn't want to invest money in education. The state doesn't want to provide enough teachers in the schools. There are no libraries, there are no laboratories. So all that you need to point out and get people to fight for that. So it's not like just because I say that it is a bad act does not mean that I say that it should be scrapped. It cannot possibly be scrapped. We work in democratic manner by educating people politically as well as engaging with the system simultaneously. So we have to do both the things, but we also have to acknowledge that it is a problematic legal instrument.
Okay, yeah, so it is no different than what I was saying. So I was never saying that it's an ideal act. I was saying that, okay, so there is something there on paper and it can be, people should try to get it enforced. And people should think beyond Bombay and beyond Maharashtra. There is still the rest of the country, and people should, from all over the state, they should network and learn from each other and move the country forward. Because if we are sliding backward and other countries are sliding or moving in a different direction, then very soon we would be at the bottom of the heap. So it's a very serious problem. This issue about equality and having a level playing ground in education. You cannot remove inequality in society. That is impossible. But at least we can remove inequality in education. So it's a serious matter, and it's an urgent matter. So people have to, and people like to admire you, people have to work together and there should be discussion about it. People should be writing articles about it in the press. I don't see any articles on the issue of inadequate funding in education in any of the national papers.
I'm sorry. Reading only English does not mean articles are not being written. I'm going to say this outright because a lot is written in Marathi, in Tamil, in Kannada, in Telugu, in Malayalam, in Hindi on these issues, in English also. Another thing, is, as much as we're all critical, it's also important to see there have been state governments and states who have done a fairly good job with a lot of the implementation also, with all the gaps that we recognize. That also needs to be, I think, looked at. And it is important that we work with the governments also, like she pointed out. And it's also in India, it's a concurrent subject, so every state has different models happening. And I'm saying there is also work happening, and it is urgent work happening. And it is, I think, unfair to presume that there is not a network and work happening, because I think it is. And I know, for example, I can speak for Tamil Nadu government today. I know that the present government is trying to make changes and is proactively doing something. Similarly, we can speak. Now, the question is, how do we make it better? And there I agree with you that we all need to work harder. But at the same time, let's, again, inequalities can mean so many things. So when you say there are inequalities, it's a range of ideas of inequalities. So I think it's also important to acknowledge that it's not an empty vessel of no work happening, but a lot of work is happening, while I can see a lot more can be done.
Hey, Amrishji, I would say that we'll have to keep moving in the conversation. So I would say, like, let's move from RT for now. I think this seems like a very interesting topic that we may bring up again as a separate topic of discussion and pull in the right people to have that. So Rajaram, over to you.
I just wanted to add to that, see, rights-based approach is not the only approach to make, like, after all, we live in an electoral democracy and we can change the government. To have a law in the constitution is not the only approach. And as Simantini is saying, like, various organizations like Asha is engaging with things at various levels. So a rights-based approach is not the only approach to create change in education. Yeah, so we can move on as Benay suggested to other topics. So if others have other questions to add to that, please do.
So I think it's not just this government, right? In Tamil Nadu, for example, since Kamaraj's days, the way that we have done this is incredible.
Exactly, it's important that point is made.
Yeah.
Please do.
So it's not just the midday meals, but the access to government schools. You know, Radharam always says that, you know, within 1 kilometer of a hamlet, there has to be an elementary school. Within 2 kilometers, there has to be a middle school. And within 4, a high school. And it actually works in Tamil Nadu. So it is very much available. So,
I think
technology. They, in Kerala, they have worked with technology, trying to free it from the giants, I mean, the commercial industry. And they worked very closely with an organization in Bangalore called IT for Change. You know, actually drawing about getting like pedagogical and technological solutions together, which is called the technological pedagogical content knowledge, in terms of actually engaging with technology rather than be the consumer of it. And so they have written programs that children and teachers use. One of the things in terms of investment, Kerala definitely does much better. I mean, they need to do much more because there is still privatization in Kerala and one must not glorify things that are there. But governments also have put, and there are other forums called All India Forum to Right to Education, you know, which actually builds discourse around these issues. For example, this Right to Education Forum that actually does studies and informs people as to where the progress of implementation has happened. So there is a lot of that collective energy that is there.
Program about public schools, right? Common public school systems. Exactly. So much is written about them, and so many policies have been. The people are working on that to get a common public school system, in spite of the RT.
that's right.
I would also add to that is that we get opportunities as private schools to adopt government schools. Yeah, we in Tamil Nadu, in the sense, if a government school doesn't have infrastructure, we have access to our libraries, we've accessed many things in collaboration, and that works also very well. You know, and we've had interactions. So these kind of creative, innovative things are happening. It's not like it's not.
So actually what she's saying is what Asha Chennai does. I mean, we do work in government schools completely.
See, clearly Tamil Nadu and Kerala are in the vanguard. I'm more concerned about states like UP, Rajasthan, Madhya Pradesh. They have large populations. So similar work should be done there also. Now, for example, I come from Delhi. Right now I'm sitting in Delhi. We do not have an Asha chapter here in Delhi. So I feel concerned about it. We have chapters in Chennai, we have chapters in Bangalore. Can you guys hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you.
The answer is thank you for volunteering. I hope you are volunteering to start volunteering. Thank you, sir.
No, we have what I mean, people who are stationed in India, you have networks and you probably know people in Delhi. So you have to encourage people to set up chapters in other cities which are not well served.
Thank you for volunteering.
Right? So
you can do as much as we can do. I think we should all do that. I'm glad you are also going to volunteer to do that.
No, but I'm going to go back to New Jersey. So if I were permanently in Delhi, then yes, I would certainly offer to do so.
Hey, Amreshji, I think we really need to move on. And
Yes,
your point of view, like growing Asha into other parts of India or other parts of world, that is one of the topic we'll be chatting about in the next session. So please hold that thought. We'll definitely talk about it. And we definitely see a lot of need, but I think we do need to wrap it up. Rajaramji, like if you want to take one or two more questions and then move on to next thing, that will be awesome. Thank you.
Any questions? I don't see any hands here in India. So if you have any questions on the Zoom or in the US session.
Is there any other question, Shyam? No, I think maybe we should just hear from the speakers if they have any parting thoughts for us. Like again, my request.
Question, Vinay, just once.
Okay, sure. Okay, Sambit has a question that he has typed. You want to just speak?
Go ahead, Venkat, sir.
So you talked about being vulnerable in school, right? So I think the biggest problem is somebody feels vulnerable, but they don't feel secure enough to expose their vulnerability. And that is one of the things, it's almost identical when you talked about why do we not have arts in school? Why is it an extracurricular activity? There's no security for the child or the parent to feel secure that they could have food on their table or shelter, right? And they feel like if you're an athlete, right? How much money, I mean, how many people can become great athletes to earn enough money to put food on the table? There is, I mean, maybe 10 in India, maybe 100, I don't know. But, you know, as an engineer, there's probably 1 million engineers, right? So it's easier for somebody to get that, which is why we still see these things as extracurricular activities as opposed to mainstream. The only way you can do it mainstream is if you provide security. In most of the advanced countries, right, there is security in the sense they, you know, they can go find a job.
Yeah, which is why I said that that's a problem outside the school. But there's another aspect here, but you know, I just want to just caution ourselves here, is that if we presume that art only happens when there's no poverty, we would have not had any art in this country.
I agree.
Most of the art forms, many of the painting styles have happened to people who are poor, who didn't have another meal. So there is that, why do they paint? They don't earn money. Why do they paint? Right? So I think there needs to be a little care over there. I agree with you that the market forces don't support, say, the stream, but there is also another thing, that there is something about the act of art itself that still can be a forceful place in a school. Then we look at how do we bridge that into, shall we say, a monetizable profession. But I'm saying let's not wait for that to happen for this to be flourishing. And that's, I think, a cop-out.
I agree.
And I also want to add one more, that a school is a space for equal opportunities. So regarding body, regarding hands, regarding intellectual, everything, there should be equal recognition. So I agree that, you know, the parents would not have the security which they feel, But it's also that we, like, let's say a person who has come from a background of weaving community, coming and studying in the school, has access to science. A person coming from a science background should have access to weaving.
Yeah.
It's a space of equal opportunity. So that is also very important.
In public schools, when a few decades back, about 10 years back, you had a school teacher in a music school teacher and an art school teacher in every school. Over the years, and particularly after the laws passed, because the nature of the norms that it has, there is a pool of schools now and teachers running between schools. So, that, and the number of people who are appointed in the school system who were very good singers or tabla players or harmonists, those people are not, they have no way to go to, you see. So it is, the private schools can afford this exposure, the kind of schools that we go to and send our children to, but the kind of schools that the law mandates should run, because the Constitution said that, even those earlier provisions are now thinned out. And with the NPA, the National Education Policy 20, that number of schools now is going to expand, because the schools are now envisaged as cluster. So there'll be one Anganwadi somewhere 8 kilometers away, and there'll be a primary school, that kind of a distance away. And not just the art teachers, but also the social science and science subject teachers are supposed to now run around between schools.
Even in America, when they want to cut down the amount devoted to education, the first thing they cut is arts, the music, or they're the one they cut. So it's a perception all over that this is not something that's important for their future. So the first, when the economy broke and they wanted to cut the money spent for education, what they did was cut off the arts from the schools.
So add this to something that I've actually proposed to a couple of governments, comes from the idea of the art side. COVID hit artists very badly across the country. So one of the things that I think possible is to look at those 2 points that public schools or even private schools, where is art happening? Then you have a large cluster of artists who actually don't have anywhere to go. So if we can conceive of something like an NREG and say every state will guarantee, say every district, you can go district-wise and say you can decide how many artists you have budgets for, say 1,000 artists in district. It's just like NREG, it is self-enrollment. So you decide whether you want to enroll. The daily fee is kept at a level where only person who needs will come in. But for 100 days, if you say you're going to give them a job, where will you do it? Do it in schools. Absolutely. Every Friday in that district, there will be a program. There'll be an art program. There'll be a workshop. There'll be a teacher. Then this can help both the struggling artists, especially from communities that are marginal, and also create then an environment for these art forms in schools from the beginning. Then the market will start responding to what is happening.
And also quality.
It can, by the way, I said performing, this can be craftsmen, weavers, anything. So this is something I've actually proposed.
That's great.
And said, can we do this? And of course, everything takes time.
It's quality, right? Because I mean, there are music teachers in schools that are not as, perfect. So clearly, if this can happen.
It's very doable. It's actually very, very doable. It's very simple.
I was just going to point out that median size of a school in Tamil Nadu, primary school, is about 30.
Yeah.
Right. Mean size is a little higher, 45 or so. But so when your solution actually works very well in that model. I like that solution a lot. But my point is moving of teachers across schools is unavoidable, because when you have schools with 20 children, 18 children, clearly a dedicated art teacher may not make sense.
No,
so
exactly why I'm saying
works perfect.
This will work better. Absolutely. Because then
this model
it kind of supports both. It also gives you a variety. It also allows you then to curate.
And naturally self-selecting to support the market.
And also, it also has a social figuring here, because it empowers the cultural environment of the district.
That's right.
Yeah. Right? So there is an empowerment of the district. It can tie itself to any other activity that you can build around it, actually.
No, but I think what I got, what you were saying, was not so much as like you were saying, because of the strength closing down. But if you're going to increase the schools as a program itself, where the budget is not going towards quality education right now, the education budget is very low, then again that is another issue because you're going to share the teachers. Rather than maybe like you have lesser schools, but increase the teachers and the quality. Rather than like if you have Anganwadis, have the Anganwadis there. You know what?
Yeah, so one thing is, see, statistically we have found that smaller schools perform better. Like especially in the primary school level, the small schools which have 20 children with a teacher or two do very well in like whatever assessments we have been conducting. So we have found that small schools work very well. Even adjusting for teacher-student ratio and things like that. So there is some greater connection between the teacher and the student. It seems like, I don't want to jump to that conclusion, but it seems like there is a greater student-teacher connection which is happening in these smaller schools. So I won't necessarily say we should move towards this thing. Even we have computer teachers who are teaching like something which need not be taught every day. So whenever you have something like that, sports or computer or art, I'm not saying that they are not less necessary. I'm saying they need not be taught every day probably. So you can have teachers who rotate across schools. So the smaller school model can be made to work with mobile libraries, with mobile teachers of various forms. So you have to experiment. So I don't think the smaller schools is necessarily a bad thing, but you have to experiment on various other things.
Yeah, but the only thing is when they come to middle school, they have to be kept the same. Otherwise, you get a big jump from the primary. That's the problem.
Hey, Rajaramji, we should stop taking any more question and maybe we should take some parting thoughts from our speakers if they have any recommendation for Asha, how we should look for Asha's future, and then we'll move on to the next topic. Thank you.
Anyone, any thoughts?
Yeah, you should tell us what we should be doing.
Some amount of debate and understanding of the policies and forming a very clear kind of a stand about, where Asha stands in terms of what it's happening in terms of the policy domain in India. And don't look at only in realm of education policy. When you look at education policy, you also need to look at the forest law, for example, because it's many children who have lives common to both the things. So it's the primary kind of thing that exercise can certainly help is to kind of have some sort of a study discussion, which is not which is a more a continual rigorous kind of understanding based on already, there is enough literature, and form your own views. Whatever you arrive at will be your, what your take on it. And it doesn't have to be something that, you reject or take, but at least commonly kind of agree on certain ideas so that things can become slightly more clear as to what you would like. Not in terms of supporting projects, in terms of your envisioning about society.
I 100% agree. We need to do more in that regard. So there is a little bit of that. You would have seen the right to health debate, right to education debate. So there is a little bit of that, but there is certainly scope for more.
There was also a vision and mission debate that went on forever.
Oh yeah. So we do. So these are the forums where we do debate a lot of that. So I don't know whether you were there yesterday for that vision and mission debate. No, even in the later, there was that going on with the online forum. Yeah. So yeah, there is a little bit of that which happens in Asha. So.
What is the criteria of certain success fee, curriculum, and certain? Is there any criteria?
He just made it convenient. There was no criteria.
No. It's general, no? Is it isn't it? It's not specific.
That's not yeah, so we have defined knowledge, so now we are going back to this.
Yes. Yeah. So that is it. So the extracurricular activities is not connected with knowledge. And it also does not qualify itself to earn money. Yeah, exactly. So that is why.
But extracurricular activities certainly part of knowledge, right? I mean.
No, it's not considered.
Oh,
So Sandeep, Vinay has already given the list.
I cannot make a living by writing. So I have to get into some other profession. It must be applicable to the same thing with all the artists. Means not the
So one tangible thing I feel concrete.
Thank you very much. You made me so comfortable.
So one,
I know.
I don't know if it's time is out, but one concrete thing which I think is that really choosing the materials you give children with a background of multicultural. Be it in any subject or anything that you provide, you could create it in a way that is more inclusive and multicultural.
The NCRT only decide that.
We have to really bring this discussion to an end. So sorry about that. So,
Look at the points people are making over there.
so but you see here the points they are making on the audio. So we really need to bring this session to an end. Really sorry about that.
One?
Very good question. But anyway, afterwards.
Yeah. So thanks a lot for all the speakers who so graciously come and listen. And I would like to really apologize for the haphazard organizing that we have done here in Asha, India. So I apologize for that. I hope you can put up with all our mistakes, and we really want to thank you for the wonderful talk that we have done. So
very enriching. Thank you so much.
So Vinay, we will probably take a 5-minute break and then resume.
Yes, sir.
Yes, sure. Like let's take 5 minutes break and we'll resume soon after.
I know that you're I will be. Yes. Thank you. Nice seeing I will do that. Another half an hour. So. No, so Vinay, we can start on the remaining agenda items. So if we delay anymore, half the people have already left. The remaining half also seem to be leaving. So, oh, yeah. Can you shift to there? Pin the US passport.
They have to turn on the video. Video is on.
Rajaramji. So
So Vinay, can you hear us?
Yeah, we can hear you. We are on a short break right now. We'll just reconvene in a couple of minutes. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Yeah, we'll just reconvene in 2-3 minutes.
अगली बार जल्दी आए बाबा से मिलने
So the topic is so all the local participants are all the remaining people. So there's only one topic remaining. The topic is collaborations, learnings, and ideas across chapters. So when the organizing team was discussing it, the thought was basically, are there projects funded by one chapter in the US which has some idea which will be relevant for, like, I'm really glad I got introduced to what Aveki is doing, right? So I didn't know about that. So this is an opportunity for that. So like the idea was to kind of bring them out. So I have learned a lot from other Asha projects. Like a lot of what Asha Chennai today is doing has been learned from what I have seen in Reward Trust. We learned a lot from that. And Dinabandhu, we got an opportunity to visit because of Nelly. And we learned a lot from seeing what Dinabandhu is doing. So the idea, the topic is like, how can we share such ideas? How can we grow from those kind of interactions? So I don't think they are back yet. So anyway, once they are back, we can start that. So. And like part of that discussion was also scalable ideas. So are there ideas which can be easily adapted by other chapters? So one of the things, like for example, I have been meaning to explore more. Like there is an organization called Sebama, whatever in Karnataka, which Asha is funding. So they have been focusing on the problem of attendance. So I have also been noticing that in a lot of government schools, that's a problem. So the communities / the parents aren't taking sufficient interest to ensure that the children attend the classes regularly and in time. So that's a problem. And Sabama's like doing something about it. So they make the children at grounds, like, so promote a child to be the leader if the child has 100% attendance, things like that. And they're claiming that that has had a pretty huge impact. So like many of these kind of ideas, I feel like when one organization successfully implements it and scale and is able to demonstrate it, we should borrow those ideas and
Actually, I had tried this 12 years back in Mumbai.
with the attendance.
There was a lot of lack of attendance. Children come for few days. We always observe no, that children are so I started working with person that time. They said the children are very danger.
Rajaramji, can you hear us? Sorry to interrupt.
So children are very
Yes, they can hear you.
Yes, we can hear you.
Oh, brilliant. Yeah, yes, we can hear you.
Okay. Hey, so I know you are jumping into the next topic, but I was wondering if we can take 2 minutes, like just to realize where we are. And like I say, we are celebrating 30 years of ASA. So we wanted to just take a moment and talk about it so that we are not only looking forward, but sometimes taking a back step and looking at what all we have achieved. So if you allow me, like maybe we can have a couple of minutes of that.